If you've been told that you have to eat carbs to get your period back, that advice might actually make things worse. In this video, I'm going to bust the myth that you need carbs to ovulate. Hi, I'm Dr. Evelyn, your naturopathic doctor and traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, and I've reversed my PCOS while going low carb. Let's walk through where this myth came from, what the science actually shows, and what your body needs to ovulate. There are typically three arguments that you'll hear from experts who advocate that carbs are necessary for ovulation. One of the most common comes from research that was done on women who had lost their period due to extreme restriction, like professional athletes, people with eating disorders, and women who have been under a lot of physical and mental stress while also under eating. In this situation, ovulation stops because the body doesn't feel safe. It's in survival mode. This is called functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. It just means that your brain hits the brakes on ovulation because there's not enough energy coming in. When researchers studied these women, they found that when they started eating more, reducing their stress, they often got their periods back. And yes, some of those foods came from carbs, but that doesn't mean that carbs themselves were the reason why the period came back. Yes, it can help if you're undernourished and underweight, but it doesn't mean that all women need carbs to ovulate. There's a big difference between malnourished and eating a well-formulated, nutrient-dense, low-carb diet. Now, the next argument that people usually have comes from observational studies. One of the most cited ones is the Harvard fertility study. This study followed a large group of women and found that the ones that eating more complex carbs had a lower risk of ovulatory infertility. This means that if you eat more complex carbs, you're ovulating more. However, here's a caveat. The people who were eating more complex carbs were compared to a group that were eating more high glycemic load carbs. So the comparison was not between high carb and low carb or complex carbs and no carbs. It was between complex carbs and high sugar garbage. So of course, if you're eating less high sugar garbage, you're going to have better ovulation rates. That's the nuance the media misses. They go from complex carbs are less harmful to carbs boost fertility. And it gets even worse. This is a correlational study, which means that you cannot prove causation. And they were tracking many different variables like high fat versus low fat dairy, animal versus plant protein, different types of exercises. So you can't even isolate the carb variable. And on top of that, the women who had a better ovulation rate also had other healthy habits that were not fully tracked. So the results are heavily confounded. And the third argument you'll hear is that keto diets or other low carb diets will decrease your thyroid function. And there is some truth to this, but context matters. Yes, in some studies, T3, which is the active form of thyroid, did go down on a ketogenic diet. However, that doesn't mean that's necessarily a dysfunction, because in those same studies, the people in the ketogenic diet did not have any symptoms of hypothyroidism, and their basic metabolic rate sometimes stayed the same or even improved. So this suggests that the lower T3 may reflect a greater metabolic efficiency. You may not need as much hormone to do the same job when you're not running on carbs. Now, there is a caveat. You do need to trigger insulin to convert T4 to T3, among many other functions. So if you're going really low protein and really low carb for a long time, you might suppress insulin enough to actually affect your thyroid. But here's the key. You don't need carbs to trigger insulin. You can do it just with protein. So if you're eating enough protein and enough calories, you shouldn't have any issues with your thyroid function. Now that we've heard the pro-carb argument, let's see what data has been left out by these experts. There are actually clinical studies that show that low-carb or even ketogenic diets can restore fertility and ovulation, especially in women with PCOS or insulin resistance. Let's take a look. For example, this systematic review of 7 studies on overweight or obese women with infertility showed that lowering carbs improved insulin, testosterone, the LH to FS8 ratio, which is very important for ovulation, and ovulation and pregnancy rates themselves also improved. This ketogenic diet and PCOS study from 2024 showed that all women in the study restored regular cycles, and over 55% conceived naturally without needing any fertility drugs. This Cleveland Clinic case series with women with PCOS resumed cycles in 8 to 4 weeks on a keto diet. Some conceived without any ovulation induction. Now, this is not to say that these studies prove anything, but we do have to look at both sides of the argument. So what is the takeaway? Low-carb diets don't shut down your ovulation. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't eat carbs, but you shouldn't be scared into eating them when a low carb approach might be the best for your particular situation. So, what does your body actually need to ovulate and be fertile? Well, number one, as we learned from the previous studies, enough food. You have to have enough calories, enough energy, enough amount of food for your brain to feel safe to tell your body that it's okay to ovulate. Number two is critical micronutrients like B vitamins, retinol, zinc, magnesium, and many others. If you don't have enough raw materials, you can't make hormones, you can't make a baby. Number three is stable blood sugar. Now, if you're in the category of extreme athlete or a person with recovering from eating disorders, carbs might be fine. But for most of us with PCOS or insulin resistance, actually lowering your carbs is going to give you that stable blood sugar. Number four is strong circadian rhythm. This means natural light during the day, darkness at night. If you want to know more, check out my other videos. Number five is good mitochondrial function. Now, some of the things that I just mentioned before will improve your mitochondrial function, but there are other elements too, like toxins and things like that. And lastly, low perceived stress. As we learned before, both mental and physical stress can interfere with ovulation. To summarize, carbs aren't evil, but they're not a hormone hack. Now, some women do better with moderate carbs, especially if you've been under eating or you're extremely active. But for many women with PCOS, insulin resistance, or inflammation, adding carbs can actually make things worse. So if you're interested in learning more and healing your hormones naturally without fear-based advice or one-size-fits-all protocols, I invite you to join my free school community, where you get access to the first module of my hormone mastery course and you can ask me questions directly. I hope to see you there, or I'll see you in the next one.